Good evening, comrades. It's online communist forum organised by Communist Party of Great Britain. We've got two sessions tonight. We're starting with Yassamine Matha on Iran. No B-2s over Iranian skies, at least for the moment. And then when we finish the discussion on that, um, depending on time, we'll have a political report from Jack Conrad on behalf of the PCC, Provisional Central Committee, talking about Genric and the Palestine Action and your party and Greenland and so on. So, Yasmin, your opening, half an hour or so, followed by discussion on Iran. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Sam. I'm in the difficult position of trying not to say anything about which I have written, not extensively in the last few days, some of which is online, and it will bore you if I repeat them. I will start from some general points, some of which I referred to last time, and that is the mountain of fake news and AI-generated, non-AI-generated lies that we are facing, because I think we have to put them out of the way before we can discuss reality. So in the absence of internet, which is deliberate by the Iranian government because it doesn't want news to come out about protests, although we don't seem to see any new protests, but it's very conscious, fearful of any information getting out. We are seeing the use of viral false AI, fake AIs, some using artificial intelligence, some just lies. So we have, we saw videos that went viral that shows protesters successfully attacking police vehicles, and immediately after they were checked, it became clear they had visual inconsistencies, so that was a lie. We also had a report that Indian nationals had been arrested during the protest. Among the protesters, this was so strong that the Iranian ambassador had to officially deny this, both on Indian media and elsewhere. And we also had, we've had in the last few days, inflated death figures, which are far beyond what is possible, what is likely. There has also been talk of use of chemical weapons by the security forces. We've had clips from earlier protests, for example, 2022, or demonstrations, protests in US about the killing of a woman who was killed by ICE, presented as protests in Iran. We've had clips of Los Angeles riots shared online with captions claiming they were from Tehran in 2026. So the misinformation is just unbelievable. We also had, as I explained last week, a lot of fake pro-Pahlavi videos, some of which is deliberately, in my view, being distributed or supported by the British Foreign Office, by other organizations. Amazingly, Trump hasn't fallen into that bandwagon. I'm not sure why. Maybe he knows more than the British Foreign Office. All of this and these scenarios, and the fact that a very large number of people have been killed in these demonstrations, has led to a number of articles, debates put forward by people such as Mearsheimer, who talks of the various stages of regime change and explains to us that this is deliberate CIA, Mossad policy, and we should wait for the US military intervention in Iran or possible US military interventions. There are various versions of this available. I'm not denying that some of this does fit a plan of imposing sanctions, then playing with the currency. All of these have happened. Then demonstrations, protests where agents provocateurs get involved. Probably yes, to a certain extent, not to the extent that the supporters of the Islamic Republic are claiming, but to a certain extent. And then that paves the way for regime change. In terms of sanctions, because these are important, and I don't think I explained enough last week, we are talking of oil exports facing severe sanctions, but also sanctions that affect any financial transaction as controlled by SWIFT or any other international banking. So Iran can't sell its oil or receive foreign currency as a result of this, and therefore its income is severely damaged because of that. It does sell oil to China, but at a much lower price. The tankers that contain this oil can't be insured because Iran has no access to insurance. So there is a complicated way of carrying this oil. There can't be any, not only is the price of this oil very low, much less than per barrel on the open market, but Iran often doesn't get paid in real money. And this is because China doesn't want additional banking sanctions. When it did buy Iranian oil, it faced very serious sanctions. So there's no dollar exchange, no euros. Iran purchases most of the goods, the essentials it wants, food items, basic medical supplies and so on from the West. It has to use the dollar and the euro for that. The payments are often not only not in dollar or euro, but they're held in Chinese banks. They are in yuan, the Chinese currency, or paid through barter, so goods instead of cash. That means the money does not circulate through the wider economy. Whatever income there is, a bit like the currency, the beneficiaries of it are the states, the oligarchs, both private and state oligarchs associated with government organizations, including the Revolutionary Guards. And all this creates more economic problems and more poverty for ordinary Iranians. So in addition to all this, all of Iran's assets are blocked in Western countries, so it can't use those blocked reserves to help its currency. It is deprived of foreign direct investments because of sanctions, and its currency has faced problems. However, contrary to what I thought, this latest fall in the Iranian currency wasn't simply a gradual fall. It actually fell 30% as a result of UAE, United Arab Emirates, being involved. And here you have to see that Dubai and United Arab Emirates are, if you like, the external port for Iranian currencies. That's where Iran does its exchanges and so on. And those who are in conspiracy theories will tell you that UAE, not known for its friendship, deliberately did this. I don't buy that. I think we were facing a collapse of the dollars. The sanctions were not going away, and maybe it triggered that decision in UAE about the currency triggered something, but I don't think that was the fall was inevitable, if you like. Again, contrary to what some people say, I don't think it's as simple to say that there were economic protests in the original days and then there was foreign involvement to make it political. In a dictatorship, economic protests become political, as I think I've said before, but also the state was at the same time negotiating, at the same time suppressing the protests. It was inevitable that clashes would ensue. Contrary to what BBC and the echo chamber of global media wants to make us believe, I don't think it had anything to do with Pahlavi's call. In fact, now he's saying openly, although he's so stupid, he's made so many contradictory statements, it's difficult to know which one not to cry at, because laughing is no longer laughing matter when people lose their lives. But now he's saying, no, I didn't tell people to go to the street. Why? Because people are saying, well, so many people died. You said there will be foreign support to help them. You're to blame for some of the deaths. He's now saying, no, I didn't go. This hasn't stopped absolutely corrupt media outlets to tell us that people went to the streets because of Pahlavi Code. This includes, as someone reminded me today, Lisa Doucette of the BBC and everyone else. No, you have a protest against dictatorship, the state becomes violent. It's inevitable that those protests escalate. And here there was clearly some external involvement, but that was not to the extent that the Islamic Republic is saying. And I will explain why this concept of foreign involvement is being picked up by people who are basically apologists for the Islamic Republic or are so much into supporting China, Russia, that they must find excuses for everything and don't use their blame. We now know that thousands have died. I would say the figure is probably, from what I've read that is reliable, the figure is probably above 2,300, but maybe nowhere near the other figures that people are mentioning, maybe up to 3,000, maybe up to 4,000. We know it was in the thousands because Ayatollah Khamenei told us yesterday that that was the case. He said they have trained some people outside and inside the country. They brought in terrorists. They set fire to mosques. They set fire to bazaar in Rash, and they killed so many people. Not true. There were people, there were agents, there is no doubt, but you can't blame, it would be ridiculous to blame the deaths on these numbers. In Israel, the far-right heritage minister Amichai Eliyahu had told the army radio last week that when we attacked in Iran during the June war, we were on its soil, we knew how to lay the groundwork for a strike. I can assure you that we have some of our people operating there right now. So he wasn't openly claiming, but he was trying to take some credit. Israel's pro-Netanyahu Channel 14 also reported that foreign agents were behind the arming of protesters in Iran that led to the deaths of security forces. I think Financial Times had people who were giving it reports from inside Iran, and it's reasonably accurate to say that armed, organized individuals, some of them faces completely covered, were part of the events that instigated violence during Thursday and Friday night. Having said that, as I keep arguing, these were large protests. There were individuals, groups of individuals who instigated as agents provocateurs, not as revolutionaries, some form of rebellion. So we have to distinguish between the two. Khamenei labeled Trump as a criminal. He said 250 mosques were set on fire by foreign agents. Seminaries were set on fire. This is useful for the regime because one goal is to accuse everyone who protested to the crime of waging war on Allah. And their hope is that this would steer some sentiments. I actually think this is not a good idea because the hatred of religion, and indeed the hatred of religion's intervention in life, ordinary lives of Iranians, is so strong that this won't work with the young population of Iran. It might work with the Bazaris, it might work with the allies of the regime. It will not work with there is a hatred of clerical institutions in large sections of the society. However, if we take Khamenei's, the supreme leader's claims that he didn't say all the deaths, but he was implying that it was paid traitors that caused the death, I would argue that that is a worse indictment of the Islamic Republic. So here we have 47 years in power, dictatorship, limited democracy for its own supporters, in factions that only have a very limited confine, and yet so many infiltrators managed to enter the country, get involved in Iranian society, or so many Iranians were ready to be paid by Mossad that they achieved this situation where they seriously endangered the lives of ordinary citizens. Such a government is not in control of the capital or the major cities, so maybe it should resign. I mean, that's the inevitable consequence of a supreme leader coming to tell us that the thousands who have died, his words, not mine, was the responsibility of foreign infiltrators. We are facing a difficult situation after these protests. The internet is completely shut. There is limited reopening of very selected services, mainly to help the government, since Wednesday, but it's very limited. This has created a lot of fear amongst people, both in Iran, but also in diaspora, because they can't reach their relatives. They don't know what is going on. Iranian society and Iranian individuals rely very heavily on the internet. It's not just a convenience of communicating with each other or social media and so on. Quite a lot of functions in Iran are via internet, education, health, traffic. You get your traffic fines not through letters, as I do in this country, but through SMS. So internet is part of everyday life. But there are also more serious implications for journalists, for doctors, for those who are involved in paramedical tasks and so on. So it's a serious matter. There is another aspect to this long-term closure of the internet. It obviously is helping state repression, but it also has long-term economic consequences. The long-term economic consequences were taught to us at the time when the internet had to shut down during the June war. Many comrades in Iran reminded us that quite a lot of the labor force, because of the state of the economy, quite a lot of the labor force is employed in precarious jobs. and the gig economy. And the closure of the economy deprives most of these people of any income, not just some income, any income. And therefore it reduces anxiety, hunger, poverty, and so. Of course, then Elon Musk announced that he was giving Starlink membership to every Iranian who applied without cost. So you could get free Starlink. That hasn't worked. The state has jammed it. But also most ordinary Iranians would need to rely on internet based in Iran. They don't know how to even use this. So that's an impossible situation as well. When we are looking at the current, if you like, today's report, we are told that some shops have reopened. Saturday is the beginning of the week in Iran, but apparently there were very few people buying goods because of fear, because of the whole state of chaos that exists. ATMs are not accessible because the internet is shut. We are told that many people who were interviewed, and here again you have to leave a lot of room for some of it is true, some of it is probably not true, but quite a lot of people who were contacted either in person or by media talk of despair, hopelessness, and that's inevitable. Once you have the hope that something important will happen, such as the fall of the Islamic regime, which the media outside Iran was propagating. If you remember, people like Trump were saying, go to demonstrations, we are behind you. And then you have a return of strong dictatorship. That sense of loss and hopelessness is actually more damaging than the period before it. So I can imagine that the sense that some comrades are telling us from inside Iran is not an exaggeration. There is an element of despair. The US intervention, which according to Mearsheimer and others would have been the last stage, would have been a military intervention, went through so many upheavals, I've lost count. So we had Trump telling Iranian authorities to treat protesters humanely. As you remember, he then excused the Iranian leadership in the face of the first set of deaths, saying, "Oh no, they were not killed by the government. There was large crowds. There was stampede." Then he claimed he was threatening Iran. I'm going to intervene. I'm going to do this. Stop killing, and so on. And I don't think anyone paid any attention. We have these large number of deaths, but then he claims that he stopped Iran executing 800 protesters in one day. Now, dictatorships are stupid, but they're not that stupid to execute 800 people in one day. Islamic Republic of Iran wouldn't have stayed in power 4.5 decades if it openly executed 800 in one day. It might have killed in the 1980s 800 political prisoners in one day, but it was not announcing it. It was doing it in hiding. So Trump's claim is again absolute nonsense. There are many reasons stated by various people as to why the United States refrained from this direct military action. High amongst them are strategic risks involved in such a action and clear objectives, and in my opinion, quite significantly pressure from regional allies of the United States, who were concerned that there was a high potential for triggering regional wars, separation wars, civil wars. Saudi Arabia and Qatar urged US apparently not to stage a war. I think their fears are for their own economic future, but also the security fallout for such an event. Turkey remained very focused on its regional interest. As some of you know, Turkey is very much in a competition with Israel. It wants to be and shows itself to be the competitor of Israel as a major regional power. In the kind of influence it has in the Azeri areas of Iran, Turkey was adamant to encourage its supporters to give anti-Pahlavi slogans. This was a direct attention or against Israel. As you know, Turkey is also involved in setting up trials about genocide in Gaza and so on. So on the whole, it wants to present itself as someone who supports the Palestinians, who is going to campaign against genocide. And all this, in my opinion, should be seen as part of its rivalry with Israel. There was also, I think, no consensus as to how this regime change, or as Moshe put it last week, regime capture can happen. There wasn't any consensus on who would replace this. Clearly, Trump has he's said it, he's made it very clear, he has no faith in Pahlavi. There are good reasons not to. He's completely useless person. Someone was asking me today, after so many decades, for 3.5 decades, maybe longer in the US, why can't he speak? 4 decades in the US, why his English is so poor. I'm afraid his Farsi is worse. I mean, he's just not a very bright person. He couldn't keep close allies, groups of 5 or 6 around him. He's just a creation of Mossad. He's a creation of the Israeli Zionist movement. And again, as rightly pointed out before by others, Israel really has been close to the Pahlavi dynasties. They want him to be put in power. But amongst even the terrible state of the Iranian bourgeois alternatives, he's probably the least competent and the least possible figure. The US was also well aware, and I think Trump and MAGA are well aware of the risk of failed operations. So it's very much fresh in Trump's mind that he doesn't want, for example, an execution of an assassination of the supreme leader that has any risks. If it was risk-free, if there was a 100% way of removing him and putting someone in power, that might have succeeded. But obviously their calculation was that this wasn't the right time. They might do it tonight, they might do it later, but it wasn't the right time. There were also rumors that the US administration was talking to senior reformist figures. As you know, the Times mentioned Larry Johnny, who has some problems with the supreme leader, but he's also an obedient servant of the supreme leader. Other figures mentioned were Rouhani, the former president of Iran, and former Foreign Secretary Zarif. And the argument there was that they are in discussion for a smooth transfer of power. And in Tehran on Thursday, or at least according to some, in Tehran, there were rumors that they were arrested or that they were under house arrest. None of this is true. As far as I can tell, they weren't involved in any discussion. It would have been silly because none of these people have the kind of support in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard that has so far sustained this regime. So the main condition for regime change in terms of a smooth transfer of power or a coup d'etat or the coming to power of factions under the leadership of IRGC commanders did not exist because the IRGC is solidly behind the supreme leader. This supreme leader is not someone who would voluntarily leave. Having said that, there are those in Iran who do tell us that, like Ayatollah Khomeini, who in the latter days of the Iran-Iraq war agreed and went on television and said, I am drinking poison and accepting this terrible peace. We can't, he might do that. He, faced with a serious threat to the very existence of the Islamic Republic, I don't think he's concerned about him as a person. He's more concerned about the Islamic Republic. For him is essential. Faced with that, he might accept whatever is being presented. However, my guess is that the United States will not accept this. However much he backtracks, however much he says, okay, let's take the bottom line. He says, I will stop the nuclear policy. I will not support, I will not even allow my supporters to give slogans against Israel and so on, which is impossible because then it's a denial of him as a person. But even in those circumstances, I would say he will, US will not accept it. For the US administration, especially for Trump, the 1979 revolution is something they can't forgive. At various times, both during Iran-Contra, but also during the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, Iran's Islamic Republic did its best to ally itself with US and its Western allies. It was they who didn't accept it. In the words of George Bush, after Iran had done all it could for the change of power in Iraq, for the war, but then their allies becoming the rulers of Iraq, George Bush called Iran part of the axis of evil, and that was, if you like, the end of that period of rapprochement. For Iranians who keep telling us, oh, well, the Shah is bad, we have to do something to protest about protesters in Iran, I agree. I wish we could do something, but whatever you propose so far in my opinion, will not work. So what are the proposals? Let's get the public opinion of the world to support the Iranian protesters. I am doing what I can, but it is an uphill struggle, not because we don't believe the Iranian protesters, not because we have any doubt about these protesters, but because the echo chamber of the media has sold this as a protest by a pro-Zionist, pro-genocidal Pahlavi. I think this is almost the worst thing anyone could do for supporting Iranian people. Iranian people face two enemies, the enemy outside, which is very dangerous, but also a very brutal regime inside. The worst thing you could do is associate their protest with genocidal Netanyahu. And that's what the press and media are doing globally. Whether they do it consciously or unconsciously, they are responsible for what is happening. But we should also have no hope in these human rights groups, United Nations Human Rights Organization, Iran Human Rights Group, this or that Nobel Prize winner. They are giving their presents to Trump. So let's not have any illusion in Iranian Nobel Prize winners. They were no better than Machado. And let us remember that we live, while we are looking at Iran, let us remember that Iran is not in isolation. We are living in a world where in the last 3 weeks alone, we've had the events in Caracas, regime change or regime transfer, whatever you call it. We've had the events in Minnesota. We've had a president in the US who's taking the chair of US Federal Reserves to court. We have a US president who wants to take over Greenland, openly says that, and is putting sanctions, tariffs, sorry, not sanctions, against European countries because they're saying, well, you can't just walk into Greenland. We might negotiate, but you can't just take it over. And we are living in an era, in the 3 weeks of this first 2.5 weeks of this year, we live in a period where Trump has now announced 5 terrible people as the Gaza leadership. So he's the chair. Rubio, Kushner, Blair, Witkoff are going to be his leadership senior figures of the Gaza plan. In these situations, the idea is that there's been all these motions in the UN about genocides. There's been ICC ruling against Netanyahu and the Zionist leadership. Nothing has happened. The idea is that as Iranians, we can waken the human rights organizations to the plight of Iranians. Is not going to work. I'm sorry, I wished we could, but you can't. The only way we can do this is actually to support the struggles of the Iranian working class. The silent voice in all of this has been the leaflets produced by oil workers, groups of oil workers. They are now contract workers trying to organize beyond decimated organizations in the oil companies, Wahed bus workers, the sugarcane workers. These are the voices we have to emphasize. And all of these voices are very clear. They are anti-Shah, they are anti-foreign intervention, but they are also against Iran's Islamic Republic. And that is the only way forward as far as I can see. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Yassamine. So we're going to go over to discussion on this part before we go back to any opening by Jack on general political questions. It's time for discussion on Iran. But so put your hands up if you can raise your hand if you want to speak. If you're a panelist, you can raise your hand and you can speak. But if you're not a panelist and you want to speak, then I'll ask in the chat, I suppose. Ask the chat, ask the host or CPGB in the chat and say, I want to speak. And put you on the list. Okay, who wants to come first? No hands. Such a thorough job. There you go. There's Jack. A surprise. Okay, go ahead, Jack.
Well, just to begin, thank you for that opening, Yasmin. Just to begin, I mean, because we got all this internet and everything, telephones cut off, you're saying, I mean, you seem to be saying that people are very tentative about going outside. But given how many, 90 million Iranians, a big, big country with many different cities, with different peoples, I just wondered, are we, I mean, what I'm asking is, have the protests finished? That's the first question. And again, just to make a point, I mean, last week when you spoke, I mean, certainly my hunch, for what it was worth, is that the United States is sort of in a difficult position. I'm not sympathizing or crying tears over it, anything like that. But we were precisely in a situation of where you and me, I was taking the lead from you, and you've been told that maybe the United States will attack this night, that the next night. I mean, it could still happen, as you say. The question I've got is, well, what the hell would they do? I mean, I could speculate about taking out the supreme leader. Okay, Have they got the equivalent of the vice president lined up to sort of a smooth transition? Okay, they could attack the Revolutionary Guard headquarters. And I'm shrugging my shoulders, but I mean, so what? I can see it in the 12-day war that it ended with the B-2s going to the nuclear facilities. And the Iranians had a definite interest in saying, yeah, they got us. I don't know whether they did or not. I just don't know. But I mean, this time, well, what would B-2s do? Because we're not talking about boots on the ground. There's no possibility of a ground invasion. So, okay, other than saying the United States can bomb anywhere in Iran, which is obviously true, what would a bombing or a missile raid, what would it achieve other than saying, well, the United States can attack Iran? And precisely, you raised it yourself. The possibility or the distinct possibility is if they did that, left wingers in Iran, I would say, will be justified in going out on the streets against the United States as opposed to their own government. Anyway, so I'm raising up two questions. Are the demonstrations over for the moment? In everywhere, like in Kurdistan, Dagestan, blah, blah, blah. And secondly, at least from your angle, what the hell would an American airstrike or missile strike actually do?
Thanks, Jack. You've got speakers, Moshe, then Tony Greenstein, then John Ryan. Okay, Moshe, please.
Thank you. Just briefly to report that according to Haaretz analyst, who is usually quite reliable, Trump desisted almost at the last moment from somehow forcibly intervening in Iran due to requests by Saudis and other local Arab states, as well as Israel. The Saudis and Qataris and so on were worried about implications in the Straits of Hormuz. Iran would retaliate by taking measures that would hurt their trade routes. Netanyahu, for his part, according to Haaretz, asked Trump to delay because Israel is not quite ready to face the retaliation that would be expected to be hurled against Israel in response to an American assault. Take it or for what it's worth, whether it's reliable. I mean, Tzvi Bar-El, who made these, and the other Israeli commentators have a good record of actually sort of being generally reliable. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they are right this time. So, I mean, what was certainly evident was that Trump threatened intervention until the last moment when he found a lame excuse that, they have stopped, they have delayed, they have stopped execution, so I'm not going to do anything. It seemed like a strange change of mind. I'm just reporting what I read in the Haaretz. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohsen. Yeah, I've got Tony and John and then Mohsen. Tony. Tony, where are you?
I think he might have popped out of the room. Take somebody else first, maybe. Don't know. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm here. I
Tony,
just
Tony,
didn't on release my audio and video. I was saying that Moshe took some of the questions out of my mouth in a sense that because I was going to ask what was the attitude of the Arab regimes to the protests, but I imagine that their fears are more than just a question of the Straits of Hormuz, but the repercussions for their own regime if it develops into a full-scale war. As for Netanyahu, I mean, I was going to ask, what do you see as the prospects as to the resumption of hostilities, in particular, whether another Israeli attack do you think is on the cards? Bearing in mind that Israel suffered quite considerable damage from the ballistic missiles last time around, and the United States' attention is now on other areas of the world, such as Latin America, Greenland, and what have you. I mean, he has difficulty with only 3 aircraft carriers and about 5 arenas of possible conflict. So, do you think that also played a part that the Middle East isn't his top priority? The other thing was, I mean, I did a blog this week saying on the one hand we defend Iran against Israel and the US, but we support the opposition. And as you might expect, I got quite a considerable flack from those who say you're betraying the Palestinian cause by raising these criticisms. Chris Williamson has written to me twice, and various others as well. So what do you think of this argument that the demonstrations were instigated and most of the firepower in them came from Mossad agents? And what do you think their role was in proportion to the size of the demonstrations as a whole? And my own view on what's happened is that I do think the scale and intensity of the demonstrations does demonstrate a structural and political weakness of the regime. I mean, I can't remember his name now, but the Eye has a very reliable Middle East correspondent, probably the best on what used to be called Fleet Street, and he certainly seemed to indicate that Iran has not escaped its internal problems, let alone its external ones. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. Nice to see you. John Ryan, are you there?
Yeah, hi friends. Just 2 quick things. I was going to ask. I heard a lot in the last few weeks about Baluchistan and how much is that a factor. The other thing is sort of a tangent from what Jack was saying, really. That if for good reasons people decide to sort of evacuate the public space and don't go out in the streets in the next few weeks, which there's many reasons they could choose to do that. But how will people be able to assess where the movement is in or where the movement is at that stage? And in terms of with all the stuff about the internet and stuff, how people will be able to communicate and, what sort of innovation people might be able to do. That's my questions. I don't really understand much that's going on, but thanks.
Thanks, John. Mohsen? Where's Mohsen?
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, hello,
Yeah.
Mohsen.
Hi. Yes, I mean, I agree almost with everything that Yassamine said. I just want to clarify something. That's a personal view. To understand what's happening with regards to Israel and the USA. I think it's important to understand that their policy in the region is not identical. Israel wants a weak Iran. And a weak Iran could be a regime that's overthrown. It could be a civil war inside. Whatever it is, he wants a weak Iran. And that's its only interest. It's part of his whole thing that Yasmin very rightly put down, to increase his hegemony in the region, for which he is in rivalry with, or Turkey is in rivalry with it. So I entirely agree with that. I think it's important to focus on that what Israel wants with Iran is a weak Iran, whichever way can achieve that. What the US wants with Iran, I think, is different in the sense that the overall reason for the American opposition to Iran relates to its major battle with the other hegemon, in other words, China. In other words, China is the focus of whatever America does in the Middle East, including Iran. And in that way, what he wants, it actually does not want a regime that's it prefers to have an Iran that's intact, but friendly to the US. And hence the problem that the US has is how to maneuver into a friendly Iran that is actually not that remains intact as a state, because that's the easiest way to exploit Iran. These minerals that are quite important, not just the oil, but you have these, intensely rich minerals, including these precious rare metals and so on and so forth. So I think it's important to understand that although they are in parallel in some sense, their strategic aims are in a way quite different, and that maybe accounts to some way for Trump's the way Trump has handled the situation, because he needs to have a form of regime change that he can control, to have a regime that's more friendly to the US and more friendly to the West. And indeed, that's exactly what I think probably the Saudi Arabia and so on want as well. I can't be sure. I'm just guessing on that one. But I think most of the evidence points to that there is difference in the strategy of the US and Israel towards Iran. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Mohsin. I've got. I noticed Jeffrey Vernon was trying to speak from the attendees group, and he disappeared now. Not there. If you're there, Jeffrey. I think he's not on the screen. I can't see him. Yassamine, over to you then. To deal with what's been said so far. Okay.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. We don't know where we are with the protests right now, and I don't want to say they are finished. But I think there is a lull, and that's an inevitable lull. People are scared. All the promises that various people made, if people were fooled by it, and I think most people weren't, but there was this expectation maybe that something will change. And now that it hasn't, there is inevitably a lull. But I don't think we are at the beginning of these protests. The inflation is 48%, right? There is food scarcity. People talk of scarcity, not just that they can't find luxury goods. It is food scarcity. The unemployment figure amongst the youth, the government figure, is 22%. I know people who are graduates, who have second degrees, who do 3 contract jobs, taxi driving, Uber type. Iran has its own version of Uber. Food delivery, another job. There is no job for people who have done subjects that they hope to have a career in. So that's creating anger. But I think the economic situation will get worse. The closure of the internet will have a direct effect on the economy getting worse. So these protests will pick up. I can't imagine them not picking up, unless we have some dramatic change in policy by one side, the other side, all of Iran. There is a possibility that the US attacks. I agree entirely with what Moshe's comments were, the Saudis, other Arabs. I did read the Haaretz articles that Israel didn't want US military intervention. I really didn't believe it. Maybe it's me. I know that Iran did inflict some damage to Israel, and at least the myth of the Iron Dome over Israel was broken. But the damage to Iran was far more serious, and a realization that they can't lose that many Revolutionary Guards leaders apart from anything else. I mean, we lost, 12, 13 Revolutionary Guards leaders. These are people who were trained. Some of them, okay, 1 or 2 were retired, but nuclear scientists, people dying. I think that's a bit difficult for Iran to sustain, and therefore there are winning cards in the hands of the US. That's all I'm saying. If there was a US attack, I think ordinary Iranians, despite everything, some Iranians, and including left Iranians, will go against the US. And I think we saw this during the 12-day war. It's not just nationalism, it is nationalism amongst sections of the population, nationalism amongst ordinary civilians, citizens, but there will also be an insult, imperialism will be remembered, and so on. If you look at the history of Iran, there are still young people who haven't forgotten 1953 and the coup d'etat of the US. So it's not easy to have young people would have read about it, have heard about it. They're angry about the humiliation of their country. So I think there will be reactions to that. But at the same time, you have to think that we are talking of a superpower that can potentially assassinate the supreme leader. The assassination of the supreme leader can pave the way. I'm not saying it's what the US thinks, but it can pave the way for a kind of regime change. If the supreme leader wasn't alive, Rouhani Zarif presumably will jump on the bandwagon of negotiating with US. They can't do it now because he's alive and they will be punished, and the Revolutionary Guards are with him. What we don't know, and I think is the $64 million question, is are the IRGC commanders, the leadership of the Revolutionary Guards, are they deep down more aligned with the reformist factions? They want survival of their major economic gains. Some of them, even the trials in Iran shows that some of these people are amongst the super billionaires. This is not the Revolutionary Guards that put its life in danger in 1979 to come to power. They're now connected, at least, or part of the oligarchs with multi-billion-dollar fortunes. Would they compromise with US and accept? I mean, there's a lot of talk of military coup, a military coup that will have sections of Revolutionary Guard. We don't know. And I assume there are calculations being made, but this is such a secretive regime that it'd be very difficult to make assumptions or to think that that would be possible. In terms of what Tony was saying, I'm also hearing that we are betraying the Palestinian people and so on. My argument would be that you can't have double standards. You can't say we are against Palestinians being killed, but if Iranians are killed, however misguided they are, I'm not saying not all of them are, revolutionary socialists, or not all of them are maybe have a correct understanding of imperialism, but whatever their mistakes, are we saying that it's okay for a dictatorial state to kill these people and we have to support it because it's pro-Palestinian? No, I think Iran's support, I've argued this, I know it's not a popular theme to go back to, but I've always argued that Iran's support for Palestinians is pragmatic, is at times opportunist, is not as widespread and as self-sacrificing as most people think. It does not, Hamas's finance do not come from Iran, they come from Qatar, they come via Israel. There's all sorts of complications. Even in terms of Hezbollah, Iran's support existed, was extremely important in the 1980s, maybe up to 1990s, but now Hezbollah is beyond all this. Hezbollah is has rich financial backers, major Lebanese in diaspora, some of whom are not even Shia or Muslim, right? So let's be realistic. Hezbollah will not go down the drain. Psychologically, a collapse of Iran, as it is, will be damaging to the Palestinian people. I admit to that. I think that's true. But I don't think we are betraying the Palestinian people if we say, no, killing civilians, because they are protesting against hunger, because they are protesting against unemployment, but most importantly, because they are protesting against a corrupt regime that has created this disastrous economic situation, is betraying the Palestinians. It is precisely, we support the peoples of the Middle East, not just the Palestinians. In terms of Balochistan, John is right. So in Balochistan, we have a liberation organization for Balochistan. It's associated with Pakistan, and Iran has the equivalent in Pakistan. So Iran supports the separatist Balochis in Pakistan, and presumably Arab Saudi funding supports these. Balochistan, as a province, wasn't prominent in these protests, but the city of Bandar Abbas, which is the biggest city in that area, has seen major protests. I think the protests in Bandar Abbas weren't the Baluchi separatists. It was mainly ordinary people complaining about the usual situation. People have a sense of saving their lives. It's inevitable. So if you are facing very brutal repression and agents provocateurs who have also killed some people, I'm not denying some people were killed, I'm sure, or at least some security guards were killed by these Mossad people. You stay at home, and that's what people are doing. They're surviving. They're trying to survive. That's what they did the first days of the war. And then when they got a bit more courage, they went for demonstrations, but they did stay at home. How can we assess the movement? I think the protests we've seen are tens of thousands. I mean, I've seen huge protest videos. These are not fake videos. You can check them. They are real videos. And there are tens of thousands in the streets of Tehran, Tabriz, all sorts of cities. And quite a lot of them are shouting, no to Khamenei, no to Shah, no to dictatorship. So they don't want regime change to Pahlavi. The fact that Lisa Doucette hasn't seen them, or obviously seen them and can't believe them or whatever, is not my problem. I think it's her problem. And the ignorance of the BBC and the World Service, which is now following a very clear political line to promote an idiot son of Pahlavi. So that is not the issue. The issue is that these tens of thousands were real people, were Iranians. They were shouting slogans. The numbers of agents provocateurs, and some of them I've seen on videos, were few, but they weren't the dominant figures. They weren't the large numbers. So I would say precisely because of that, there were thousands of Iranians, and that's why we have to support them. With Mohsen, there are differences between Israel's policy and US. But I don't think US is necessarily upset about or will be too worried about a fragmented Iran. The Wall Street Journal, I think, has an article saying an Iran divided in smaller state is not necessarily a bad state. I'm not saying it's speaking for the US administration, but it's certainly speaking for sections of US capital when it says that. And in some ways, yes, you are right. For the US, China is the more important factor here. It's less, Iran is a minor problem in this long list that Trump has accumulated in less than 2.5 weeks. But having said that, the record of the US in the Middle East in the last 30 years, I would say, but definitely since the 2001, is one of creating scorched earth. It is not a question of construction. It is not a question of simply fighting China in these countries. It really doesn't care. Look at Libya, look at Syria, look at Iraq. So many, 23 years after the war, it's still a devastated place. I mean, it's still ruled by Shia minority, and the youth are rebelling against it. The Kurds are rebelling against it. So it's not a, if you like, a long-term strategic plan by the US. We will rule the Middle East in this way. But there are differences, and clearly, at times, not just now, but at times, and I take Moshe's point that Israel might have had reservations right now, but at times throughout the last few months, Israel has constantly tried to push Trump to attack Iran, and Trump has refused. And even when US did get involved in the 12-day war, it was to end the 12-day war. So there are differences in position, and we have to count those differences. We can't say everything is the same.
Okay, thank you, Yassamine. Paul, I'm going to take you after Jack, okay? We'll go on to the second half of the meeting now with the general opening, and then you can be first in discussion. Jack, all the other politics, okay?
Yeah, I'm gonna speak. I would have thought for about half an hour or thereabouts, and see where I get on in terms of my notes. I thought I would begin with the Tory party and Reform UK. I must admit that I don't know what I think, but it's big. You know, what's going on isn't some sort of ripple. It's not, oh, it doesn't matter. It matters. Now, I don't know what to compare it with, and you know, all analogies break down. And I was sort of scrabbling around to go, well, you know, the Social Democratic Party with Owen and Roy. No, that doesn't really do it. This is clearly what's going on with Reform is much bigger, because it's also, remember, connected in. Yasmin began her remarks with, we got to look at the global situation. And so I would fit in what's going on in the Tory party, i.e. them losing, you know, one this week, 5 councillors the next day, another ex-MP, another, you know, shadow minister, an ex. It just seems to go on and on and on. So this isn't something that's a local difficulty. This does represent a shift to the right, to avert nationalism, to social conservatism, you know, that is of big proportions, and not just something about the present leader of the Tory party or merely opinion polls. So, okay, you all know the story. I don't know who the hell it was. I don't know if that's come out yet, who the mole was that found Jenrick's resignation speech that he was apparently going to make at the worst possible moment for the Tory party. Apparently he'd been in talks for 4 months before it finally came out. He says that he's doing it, of course he would, wouldn't he, for the benefit of Britain, nothing to do with personal ambition. Well, I doubt that. Nonetheless, the fact of the matter is that he isn't just a shadow minister. He was the other candidate in the Tory party leadership race. And if we look at Kemi, according to the mainstream press, she's doing much, much better at PMQs. I don't mind accepting that. But I mean, the fact of the matter is that if you look at the Tory party, and again, I'm not getting carried away with polls, but the fact of the matter is that unusually, at least in terms of my history and my knowledge of politics, main opposition parties at the moment should be riding high in the opinion polls. And she might turn around and say we're ahead of Labour, but that just says everything. The fact that Labour is so unpopular, the real story is that both of the major parties, the historically established parties in terms of opinion polls, are incredibly unpopular. And if opinion polls are reproduced, as they could well be, we don't know, a lot can happen, but if they are reproduced in the Scottish elections, but crucially, I would argue the English local elections, then what we're talking about, is big in terms of British political prospects. Anyway, we've speculated, and of course it is all speculation, and I don't want to push it any further than that. We've speculated about the possibility of some reform Tory pact after the defection or kicking him out of Jenrick. Badenoch turned around and said there will be no pact. Don't believe a word of that. If the arithmetic is there, then there will be. It depends on polls. It then depends on the number of MPs. All I would say is, in these circumstances of unpredictability, we can have the most peculiar results when it comes to parliamentary representation. And, from my angle, this massive Labour majority tells you something. It tells you that this was possible. I never dismissed the Labour Party and its chances under a post Corbyn leadership, but it also tells you that with first past the post, you can produce results that are quite frankly semi-freaky. So we don't know. So you could have a Tory reform unofficial pact. You could have an official pact. You could certainly have a coalition either of Reform and the Tories, or you could have a similar thing, an unofficial pact, an official pact, or a coalition on the other side of British politics following the next general election. That's where we are at. In other words, I think what we need to grasp is things are very, very unpredictable. And I'm not counting it, but I do note that at least the grassroots left in your party has adopted a platform that specifically rules out going into a coalition government unless that government is committed to carrying out socialist and democratic measures. So, for example, the abolition of the House of Lords, the abolition of the monarchy, but also the struggle for socialism. Now, can you imagine Keir Starmer adhering to such a program? No. Could you imagine someone in the Socialist Campaign Group adhering to such a program? Just about. Do they mean it? No. Quite frankly, when I look at the grassroots left in your party, I have to say that I would also retain my skepticism with those comments. Nonetheless, they have made that commitment, and I think that that is not a huge victory in terms of our politics. It's a very modest victory, but nonetheless, it's sort of our politics that we don't want to participate in the administration of capitalism, because the administration of capitalism must be in the last analysis at the expense of the working class. So we take the stance in that sense, not of the rubber resolution proposed by Kautsky in the Second International, but the corrective resolution taken by the Socialist International against coalition governments with bourgeois or petty bourgeois parties. And remember, Millerand, the man at the center of this dispute, excused himself precisely on the basis of this is a government to defend the republic. So if we're talking about the next general election, at least there's the possibility of an unofficial pact, or an official pact, a coalition that's guarding against the far right, Reform UK, the Trumpization of British politics. Some on the left, not me, will talk about that in terms of fascism. If you want to look at the latest example of that, Alex Kalinikos's article in this edition of Socialist Worker doesn't quite go there, but goes somewhere near those sort of politics. My version of it is that capitalism isn't a democratic system. It's to the extent that we have democracy, it's the victory of the working class, concessions to the working class. If you want to look at capitalist democracy, go along to a company AGM. That's real capitalist democracy. It's not how many hands you've got. It's not how many people you've got. It's how much money you've got. So it's one vote for one share. Elon Musk has 1 billion shares. I've got one share. I'm not going to win. And that's capitalist democracy for me. You know, the fact that at the moment we have one person, one vote is a result of working class struggle in the 19th century and in the 20th century, in no small measure because of the organization of the working class into an international party, into a real global force, first in the First International, then in the Second International, and then, of course, the October Revolution itself, which proved that capitalism was mortal. It's not the only system on offer. Anyway, just lastly, to make the point that as well as, you know, this generic being a real feather in the cap of Farage, and, you know, if I was him, I'd make as much of it as he's making of it. Nonetheless, I would simply point out that the more defections they get from the Tory party, not only of councillors, leading ministers, shadow ministers, the more reform comes to look like the Tory party, and the more that reform then is associated precisely with 14 years of Tory rule. And Bannockott, I mean, they can't make up their mind, for example, is Britain ruined? Because if it's ruined, who caused the ruin? Now, we would argue, of course, it's capitalism, it's this and that. Nonetheless, in terms of the politics that we live in, you cannot ignore 14 years of Tory rule. You cannot ignore the role of these people that are now in reform, in, clapping and applauding Boris Johnson. You've got Nadine Norris and all the rest of it. Nadine Zahawi. So things are complex. They're not straightforward. To me, though, it isn't impossible to imagine it, but it's only my imagination that I say I could imagine a Nigel Farage government. I have pointed out last week that opinion polls, are not a prediction of the future. They are a snapshot of where we are now, and things can change very radically. I quoted Mrs. Thatcher before the Falklands War. I quoted Mrs. Thatcher after the Falklands War. I quoted Donald Trump's disastrously low poll ratings. They are the second worst in US polling history when it comes to a president, except the first Donald Trump presidency. So things can change very rapidly. We shouldn't be saying that this is what a general election will look like. Nonetheless, it's still worth speculating, about the possibilities that might be facing us in the not too distant future. Okay, so I've done about 10 minutes there, keeping an eye on the clock. Wanted to comment on Palestine action, and I am talking about Palestine action. I'm talking about the hunger strikers. I have to applaud their tremendous courage, their self-sacrifice. I'm full of admiration for them. Of course, I can harp on about, we're throwing a can of paint over an aircraft or attacking Elbert Industries and, smashing some window. That's not going to change things. Nonetheless, the fact of the matter is that what they have is mass sentiment behind them. That yes, this is the action of small groups of individuals, but precisely what the government fears and what I would hope for is when these comrades eventually go to trial, a jury will let them off. A jury will say these people were morally justified. I don't know whether they'll plead innocent or they have to plead innocent, don't they? But they can plead innocent, but say we did it. And when we've had in our own organization experience of that. So we shouldn't just view these people as isolated individuals. But I would say that precisely because of the nature of the action that they carried out, there is the danger, and I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but there is the danger of police infiltration. There is the danger of manipulation. We know in terms of history, because it was all published, that the Bolshevik, for example, faction of their MPs, their Duma deputies, was infiltrated. It was led by a police agent, right? But it was also true of the SRs, Socialist Revolutionaries Armed Wing, their combat wing. They were led by a police agent. And the difference was that the Bolsheviks in the Tsarist parliament had their speeches written by Lenin, for example, had their speeches published in Pravda, therefore getting around censorship, reached out to tens and tens and tens of thousands of workers through their legal paper, where if you look at the socialist revolutionaries, what they had was martyrs. And I would say, again, not that I'm dismissing, martyrs as an example, but it is not something that goes hand in hand with the Marxist tradition. I'm looking at the hunger strikers in Ireland. I'm looking at the suffragette movement led by the Pankhursts. I'm looking at the Palestine Action Comrades. Our approach is not to go on hunger strike. Our approach is to talk, to win over the screws. Our approach is mass publicity. Our approach is mass solidarity. So, what is seared in my brain, from being a young communist, for example, in the early 1970s, is the deliberate arrest. They knew that they were going to get arrested. The Pentonville Five, the 5 dockers who went on strike, were arrested under Ted Heath's laws. And of course, what happened is they didn't starve themselves. What happened is that workers, led by the Communist Party, led by the Liaison Committee for the Defense of Trade Unions, won tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of workers to go on strike, to the point where the TUC, most reluctantly, was threatening a one-day strike. I remember at the time, the Socialist Workers' Party was arguing against a general strike. And they were let out, and they were carried out of Pentonville Prison shoulder high. When the comrades are put on trial, when they are found innocent, I hope the same thing happens, that they are carried out of court and they are freed by mass sentiment. And that relies on us getting the idea out to masses of people that Israel and the British government are guilty. The British government is complicit in what's gone on in Gaza, what's gone on in Palestine. I'm not going to deal with Trump's plans. We've got an article commissioned, and hopefully that will be in this week's paper. Okay, 24 minutes, 8:24. So I'm going to finish up in the last few minutes, Stan, just by dealing with, I think, your party. I'm going to leave Greenland, and I'm going to leave Ian Russell, the father of Molly Russell, to next week. So just very quick comment on your party. We've had the nominations for your party executive. Apparently, according to your party, hundreds have put their names forward. Of course, they've still got a huge hurdle to cross. Each candidate has to get 75 backers. Now, that will be all right, I suspect, if you're on Jeremy Corbyn's list, because Jeremy Corbyn's faction have the list of members. They know who's a member locally in this region. They know who's a member in that region. And I'm sure that they can sort that one out. If you're an individual, on the other hand, I think the procedure is you put forward a 300-word political statement, and they will then publish it. And that's going to be the limit of your publicity, unless, you know, you've got your own blog and you've got tens and tens of thousands of followers and all the rest of it. When it comes to hustings, I think things will be similarly controlled. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm being unfair, but I suspect we'll have something like a trade union election where you're not allowed to criticize the other side. I suspect we'll have something like 3-minute limits, like we had at the Liverpool conference. I mean, personally, as you know, anyone who's attended these online communist forums, I find it very difficult to say hello in half an hour, let alone to put forward a coherent argument in 3 minutes. I mean, I can insult someone in 3 minutes, but to actually put forward a coherent platform, I think is an impossibility. I could say, I support Jeremy Corbyn. That would be, you know, that's clear. But then to say, for example, if I said, I don't support Jeremy Corbyn, and I started to explain why, I think I'm still, you know, I think I'll be cut off in 3 minutes without getting anywhere. You're going to have to explain something. So I think that there's an inherent bias in these elections. They are not free, they're not fair, they are stage managed, just as Liverpool was disastrously stage managed. I mean, I was there and I just felt this strange experience that we had these mini debates with squeeze contributions, with our comrades quite rightly taking advantage of putting up their hands and speaking for the other side. They couldn't get anyone to speak for their side. So our comrades put up their hand and spoke both times. Nonetheless, I was in that strange experience of not putting my hand up when there was a vote. I just found it surreal. So, okay, we've got the elections. We haven't got a clue what the result will be. I don't think it's going to be a rerun of the referendum that we saw, but it could be. You know, I think the left has got its act together a bit better than that, but maybe that will be the situation. If the left does well, which I hope it does, you know, I hope it will be around the grassroots left. The negotiations have been difficult. We will publish what's going on. We'll publish the difficulties. I don't think that undermines the grassroots left. I think honesty, transparency strengthens the grassroots left. Because if we look at the other side, it's precisely them that's been guilty of opaque behavior. I mean, who's the leadership today of your party? We apparently have got in place some people chosen by a sortition. Who the hell are they? You know, what consultation are they having between each other? What about, I mean, is it really the case that the independent MPs are running it? Or are there loads of other people that we don't really affect, like in Peace and Justice? Are they running it? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know who leaked the story, for example. Does anyone know who leaked the story to the New Statesman and then the Guardian? I don't know. And so we don't want opaque. We want openness. We want transparency. Yes, deals are done. There are arguments, but we think that coming out openly about that is a strength. Hiding differences, keeping the membership in the dark is a sign of weakness. Okay, also on that, I'm going to finish in 1 minute, Stan. We also have in the current edition of The Socialist an open letter by Hannah Sell saying, can we stand candidates? They want to stand Dave Nellist. They haven't had a reply. My suspicion, because he put himself forward, I think he's been mentioned already, Chris Williamson of the Workers' Party, the former Labour MP, put himself forward, and he's found himself barred. I suspect Dave Nellist, who's put himself forward, will find himself barred. I suspect, but I don't know, anyone associated with the SWP will also be barred. How far it goes, I don't know. But what a way to begin a party of the left, by excluding good left-wingers, like, for example, Dave Nellist. I've got my differences with Dave Nellist. Of course, they're well known. But he is, a working class fighter. And I would say he would actually be a strength in terms of your party. To exclude him and to begin your party, as they did in Liverpool with a witch hunt, it doesn't surprise me that the wind has gone from your party sails. And far from us having 800,000 or 850,000 or 50,000, we're far lower to that. Doesn't surprise me that there are 20,000 registered. It doesn't surprise me that 10,000 took part in the latest referendum. I think that your party needs rescuing, and it needs rescuing by the left. And I'm going to finish with that, Stan, because it's now, at least by my estimate, 31 minutes past. So apologies for running over. That's it.
That's all right. Well, we're not strict on time
I know, but
anyway. And so I've got to Paul, but also among the attendees, Joseph Flynn. So would the host please transfer Joseph to make him a panelist, Joseph Flynn, so he can speak. Of course, I remember when we were dealing with the Labour Party much more, we know that Marxist organisations were amongst the founding organisations of Labour Party. They were welcome at that time. Paul, and we can speak about, we speak about what Jack said, but also about Iran, because Paul was with his hand up first session. Go ahead, Paul.
The bit on Iran was just a question, really, to Yassamine. Why has there been so much emphasis on the alleged role of provocateurs and foreign agents in this particular uprising? I mean, that question's always raised when you get unrest, but this has really gone much further than I think I've ever seen before, by various rival people complaining about it or applauding about it, like Israel's doing, complaining about it like the pro-Mullah people on the left. I really never seen anything quite like it. On Jack and populism, and an interesting point about how much the populists right, the reform in Britain will end up just looking like the Tories if they keep recruiting all these people. I think that's a very interesting point. But I think that three things come in here. One's domestic policies. Now, they're going to bang on about refugees and boats and all that, but then that's just the same. It'll probably be more intense. But they're just going to be in the lead of a horrible race amongst the Tories and Labour to say who's the hardest on these people. I've also got the question of local politics, because it does, when you read the press, admittedly it's biased against reform, but the level of incompetence of reform councillors who don't seem to know what a councillor's job is or anything is even by the somewhat low standards of British local politics is pretty farcical. How much that will translate into reform as a hopeful government party, I think that's an interesting thing, which I don't know how one will reflect on the other. Now, the other two things are foreign policy. Now, Jack said he's going to look at the question of Greenland and other foreign policies next week. But I think it does key into the question of right-wing populism across Europe, because we're finding more and more now European liberalism is banking its future on a Ukrainian victory, which seems less and less likely and more unlikely that Russia will enforce its will on Ukraine. This, I believe, will reinforce European right-wing populism, as they'll be saying, well, we told you not to get involved in this war, we needn't be enemies of Russia and so forth. And if, with a Ukrainian military collapse, the Europeans carry on backing what would be a festering situation of armed resistance within occupied Ukraine, then the populists could become a sort of a peace party. And they'll also say, look at all the money you poured down the drain and all that. I mean, we are talking about billions of euros for a lost cause. There's the possibility that Le Pen could come in as the French president, or if not her chum, the deputy, was it Baudelot or whatever his name is. That will be a major shock to European liberalism. I mean, they've got a fascist in charge in Italy, but Italy is still a bit of an outlier. France is one of the two core members of Europe. That goes fascist, far right, then that puts the whole ethos of Europe as a democratic liberal entity in jeopardy. How? I mean, yes, at the moment, people like Orban, Fizzo can be shoved on. I mean, they're little countries about which we know little, to use the phrase. But France goes to the far right. What is going to be the impact there? Even though Britain's out of the common market now, it's going to have an impact there. And secondly, the question of Greenland. Now, democratic Europe is huffing and puffing about Trump's annexations, but are they really going to do anything? Okay, they send a few boats and troops across or fly them into Greenland, but are they really going to confront the USA, or will the USA just sort of not militarily, but will lean on Europe? And they're not, with Europe, democratic Europe, so intent on keeping America in Europe, especially over the question of Ukraine. Are they really going to confront the USA over this? I don't think so. How will the populists actually deal with this? Are they going to become ultra-nationalists in the sense of how dare the USA encroach upon part of Europe? Or will they hedge like the European Democrats are doing? I don't know. But I think that the populism could be given a considerable boost by events across in the east of Europe and on the western fringes in Greenland. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Next is Joseph Flynn, and then I've got Ian and then Pam. Joseph.
Hi, Stan. Thanks for taking me. Thank you. I thought it was a really useful introduction. I particularly like the bit where we talked about Genric. Jack talked about Genric, and then specifically said you can't separate that sort of thing from the wider moment. And I think that's right. I think it's a big moment and connected with Greenland, an even bigger moment, in the sense that I think there's a real shift happening here where large elements of what was the Tory party have just decided that they need an entire rebranding, much as the Republican Party has sort of been taken over by the MAGA movement. I think that's what effectively it has. There's still a Republican establishment sort of in the background, but they're totally sidelined. You sort of see that that's what's happening. All the people who are like that are sort of going to reform. I mean, it's astonishing, really, these people are Tories. You get inured to it, and we can be cynical about it. But, I was scrolling on X earlier today and saw this far-right troll talking about the Chief Constable of the West Midlands and how, this guy had handed over control of the streets to Islamists and was still being allowed to retire on a pension. It was a Tory MP. How did that person become a Tory MP? That wouldn't have happened even 10 years ago. And there are actually, though, people like that are all leaving for reform, which is going to become this really quite extreme thing. And in the same way the tech bros kind of eventually backed Trump, I expect to see British capitalists getting behind reform now and just backing it as the horse to back, because I just don't think they're going to hang around with Badenoch and the rump Tories for much longer. That's how the right is going to react. For me, I don't think they'll continue to be to be split much longer. I think the left, has got a problem, which is the Labour Party, the right wing of the Labour Party, which has always, I guess, had not that much politics and been pragmatic. But I don't think you can overestimate with the Greenland stuff how much their entire worldview has now been smashed. Like, I think it's a major moment when openly it's just, we're seizing land. It's 19th century imperialism. The idea that there's still a NATO, you get these EU spokespeople trying to say, oh, Russia and China be rubbing their hands together at this. Look, this guy is like Russia and China. Trump is literally saying he's just going to take stuff for oil. So it's an incredible thing, really. You can see them floundering around. There's a total complete. This is going to be. It already is accelerating sort of pacification on steroids. Starmer's on 11% for the left, and what have we got? I mean, Polanski is making all the running, isn't he? Polanski has seized this in the last day, talking about US.
You're getting a. Is it me? You're getting intermittent.
Polanski picking a fight with one man. A thing I know on social, he said he's picking those fights. I think the anti-Semitism thing is jumping the shark with them supporting Israeli football hooligans and all the rest of it. But your party just going on just with its internal election malarkey, it needs to be visible. What Polanski doesn't do is build the Palestine stuff. He doesn't support strikes. Yeah. I think your party should not be thinking too hard about standing visibly in May. There's nothing there. We need to build the branches and actually communicate with communities, because I don't think there's a shortcut to it. Work with trades councils, do what Polanski doesn't in terms of working with workers, and look outward. Sorry, I know it was a bit long, but it was thanks for that introduction. I thought it was useful.
Not at all, Joseph. That's fine. Next one is Ian, please. Ian Spencer.
Good evening, comrades. Just a few things. Firstly, in the context of the North East, especially given that County Durham is this kind of flagship council for reform, the cracks are beginning to show. It's now kind of widely being discussed about the way in which the leader of Durham's Reform Council is actually, I mean, having stood on the basis that as a successful businessman, his businesses are actually failing, and given that they've stood on financial probity, it's beginning to look increasingly silly. And the other thing about it was that quite clearly Reform are going to put up council tax, and given that they've stood on the idea of, well, low taxation and all the rest of it, so we're going to see higher council tax and cuts in services, and the leader of the council can't run his own businesses. So that just to let you know about that, really. What was also interesting today, of course, was that old Frogface didn't turn up for his interview with Laura Kuenssberg because he was going to be held to account over his relationship with Trump. And that's an interesting aspect of it as well. Whatever Trump's appeal is in the United States, the absolute horror that people have experienced in looking at the actions of ICE officers in the United States throughout the world has been horrifying, and now Farage has to account for that as well. So I think it's quite an interesting aspect that he knew he was going to be held to account for his support for Trump, his close relationship with Trump, and now what we see in the United States is ICE acting like the Sturmabteilung in Nazi Germany or something. You know, we have a group of people, some of whom have been recruited from the Proud Boys, people who took part in the so-called insurrection. At the same time, being able to invoke the Insurrection Act seems to be part of of Trump's game plan, in the hope of possibly evading entirely the midterm elections. Coming back to the northeast of England, and your party in particular, I personally feel that in the northeast of England, it's probably the region with the biggest kind of influence of Corbynistas, as it were. So I think that the Corbyn influence is still quite strong in the northeast of England, except possibly among the youth. And with that in mind, what's been in a way more interesting with your party is the beginnings of kind of local organisations around other things. So there is now an almost weekly standoff, which I only became aware of this weekend, between people. There's a sort of a right-wing nationalist group, well, British nationalist group, who kind of hang about outside the Lang Gallery in central Newcastle, and there is a counter demonstration forms against it, and usually by the late afternoon the people who are opposed to the right wing outnumber the right wingers. But it's something that's growing, and it's growing interestingly through purely personal contacts through WhatsApp groups, circumventing any kind of your party organisation, because as we know, your party organisation is almost an oxymoron at the moment, especially in the northeast, where a lot of the proto constituency groups are only just beginning to form. But what is interesting is that when it comes to, for example, local elections, people, at least because obviously for County Durham there won't be any local elections coming up imminently, but north of the Tyne there will be. And I think your party is talking in terms of, you know, we need to do something for that. We need to actually stand against these people. And I'd like to think personally that does take place. Coming back to the question of fascism, it's always, I've always gone along with the idea that, you know, you can't really talk about what's going on in the United States as fascism and that kind of thing, because, you know, I think probably Trotsky gave a good account of all of that. But nevertheless, we do have a situation where there is a growing global movement, and we do have a situation where there is I think Trump represents a kind of real nervousness in the ruling class, and the fact that you've got ICE officers on the one hand, and the potential for the growth of some kind of far right movement in the UK is of note. I won't put it any higher than that. And finally, I'll just come back to the question of the hunger strikers. The hunger strikers have been effectively interned without trial, and remand is now being used as a form of internment without trial. Remand is now the H block of the day. We've got this situation where, and of course, it's all excused in terms of all unnecessary court delays, but what risk did the hunger strikers pose at all? There wasn't a significant abscond risk. There wasn't a significant risk to any other person. They weren't going to attack anybody. But what we now have is that remand and the unconscionable delays on remand which would not be extended to people facing all sorts of heinous criminal charges, and now being extended to political detainees. Remand today is the H block of the president. That's all I had to say. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Ian. So Pam, your go.
Okay, thanks very much. Right, I'm mute. Okay, two main points. Well, three. Just to comment on that last bit that Ian was talking about fascism and how we identify it, etc. And the potential for ICE to morph into some sort of independent fascist type militia. It does feel like that, doesn't it? Especially with the death of Renee Good and the controversy about it, and enormous uprisings in these cities where Trump has sent ICE in and also the military, etc. Right. So my two main points are, first of all, on your party and the CEC elections and the slates. Jack mentioned the grassroots slate. This morning on Crispin Flintoff, he had a representative of the grassroots slate from Sheffield and of the Corbyn slate, and I don't know where she was from. Okay, so which was very interesting. At first, they were sort of pussyfooting around, I think. I didn't hear all of it, but by the end, the Corbyn representative and other peer, I know Tony Greenstein was there, so I hope he bears me out or corrects me if I'm wrong.
No, he's gone, I'm
Oh,
afraid.
anyway, there may have been some other people who saw it. But anyway, my strong impression was that by the end, the Corbyn representative was calling the grassroots rep saboteurs and destroyers and really heavy aggro against the grassroots platform. And the other criticisms of the grassroots platform. The Corbyn platform was short, and the grassroots was too long and too complicated, and the Corbyn party wanted a broad mass party, and the grassroots slate would put everybody off. So that was the first point. So it was a clear line of demarcation. Second point I want to make is probably more complicated. In my Marxist milieu, where I live, where I work with the Trades Council, my union, PSA, whatever is going on, I was under heavy criticism from Workers' Power comrades and ex-Workers' Power comrades this week about Mike McNair's article on, what was it, Old Corruption Revived, about stakeholders, etc. And their main criticism was that Mike completely ignored any mention of working class organisation when he was talking about Parliament and the problems of Parliament and this sort of thing. And did the CPGB perceive development towards revolution just through Parliament, and that was their impression, and therefore CPG was deluding the working class movement to thinking that you could get socialism through Parliament? And why weren't they talking about workers' councils and the development of independent workers' struggle? Right, so I mean, and I've just had another look at Mike's article, and it's true, it doesn't mention anything about that. You could argue that he wasn't talking about that. Nevertheless, it doesn't get much attention in the paper. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
I think that's great, Sir Pam. Your Marxist milieu where I live. That's lovely. So Mike McNair.
That's fun. For what it's worth, my view of it is that actually campaigning, electoral campaigning and the publication of a press is as important as strike action, demonstrations and so on, and that the left precisely tries to avoid confronting the need to do this sort of political action, tries to avoid confronting the need to take constitutional issues seriously. And in doing that, actually what the left is doing is, quote, economism with a capital E. Go back, comrades, and read Lenin's book, What is to be Done? And for that matter, go back, comrades, and look at the history of Bolshevism, that as of 1912 to 1914, Bolshevism was much more powerful than Menshevism in the electoral field and in the circulation of its press, because it projected a revolutionary politics towards the Tsarist state. But Menshevism was substantially stronger in the trade union movement and the other aspects of the trade union movement, the cooperatives, and so on and so forth. And the problem, in essence, at the end of the day, and actually events in Iran are also demonstrative of this, at the end of the day, what is essential is to overthrow the state power. And in order to do that, you have to be willing to address the constitutional order of the state power and to project a politics which can potentially reach into the armed forces of the state power and break it up and split it open. And this politics which says, oh, we do strikes and street and strikes, and out of street and strikes we're going to get Soviets automatically appearing, is delusional. I had a couple of other things. Paul, I think it's wrong to imagine that the European far right are anything other than Atlanticists. They're advocates of breaking up the European Union in order to create a hub and spokes relationship between the United States and the individual European powers, which is visible actually in the character of the Brexit project. The Brexit project always entailed more radical subordination of the UK to the United States than was previously the case. So I think it's wrong to imagine that Denmark poses that the question which Denmark poses for the European populists is their more servile submission to Trump and their demand for more servile submission to Trump from other politicians. Secondly, to Joseph, I think it's important to recognise that the Tories are historically a far-right party. The League of Empire Loyalists was a tendency within the Tory party. The Monday Club, I remember the Oxford University Student Monday Club getting it, when I was a student, got banned from using Worcester College for their dinner because they marched around the college singing the Horst Wessel Lied. The Tory party is historically hospitable to far right. It was the Tory party which organised a campaign for pogroms against Jews in the 18th century and indeed in the early 20th century. So I want to be not I want to be cautious about that, as sort of imagining that the reform is going to be something that it's unusual that guys who were in reform were Tories. It's just that's an element, that far right element is a historic element of the Tory party. Ian, I think it's a good point. Jack, I don't think you picked up on the point. Why are these guys on hunger strike? They're not on hunger strike immediately about Gaza. They're on hunger strike because the government is detaining them without trial under the pretext of holding them on remand. And in fact, actually, this goes back to another of these bloody things. It was a constitutional provision of the Habeas Corpus Act 1679 that this holding people on remand for long periods of time was a device which Charles II's government used against its political and religious opposition. And Act of 1679 makes the people who do that liable to the pains and penalties of the Statute of Praemunire, which was to be made criminally bankrupt, imprisoned for an unlimited period of time, and banned from holding public office for life. So they criminalised this holding people on remand without detention, with prolonged detention without trial. Of course, the Labour government of 1945 repealed that piece of legislation as part of a, quote, modernising exercise. We get rid of it. But it is nonetheless an important, it seems to be an important point that this abusive remand, and it's not just abusive remand in custody, because there's also abusive remand on bail, with tight bail conditions which are designed to stop people being involved in organising anti-war demonstrations and stuff like that. So that I would buy that. ICE, Pam, ICE as immigration executive as being a sort of militia or Sturmabteil. Yes, except that actually this is a history of the this history of shooting political opponents, trade unionists, etc., of the American police force goes back to the police in the American police in the interwar period, and for that matter, the song, who once was a union maid who never was afraid of the gooks and the ginks and the company finks and the deputy sheriffs who made the raid. It's the cops who are being called at, and the cops who are actually shooting at trade unionists just as much as the Pinkerton men. So what's true about this stuff is that the politics of the judiciary, of the Republican judiciary, have become revolutionary anti-constitutional politics. It's not that the level of violence you're talking about, we're just shifting back to the sort of violence which was used against the trade union movement all through the first half of the 20th century, against the civil rights movement. There's a nice book called This Non-Violent Stuff Will Get You Killed, about the fact that the non-violent protesters had to be protected by guys with guns against the Southern cops and the far right associates of one sort or another. So I think that I want to be cautious about calling it's Bonapartism, this Trump stuff, but it's not fascism. That's it.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I've got before Tina, I've got Yassamine wants to deal with answering Paul Fleurs from earlier. Yassamine, please.
Yeah, sorry. Paul, the reason we're talking about the infiltration agent provocateur isn't that it's just like every other time. This time, it is the Israeli ministers who keep going on about it. So why they do it, I don't know. But and US people, the first time I read about Mossad agents in Iran protest was a Rubio text. He wrote, for every demonstrator in Tehran, there is a Mossad agent next to it. A Shin Bet former leader wrote in a quote that Haaretz put out that she thought it was the wrong decision for various Mossad agents to claim that the demonstrators had infiltrated. Now, there has been agent provocateur in other protests, but the state that has done it hasn't been so outrageously open about it. Why? I have no idea. Was it to scare people? Was it to scare the Iranian government? Is it part of a bravado of the Israeli state? I'm not party to their decisions, but I think that is unique. I don't remember any other case where people openly claimed they were supporting a demonstration in an enemy country and they had their people on the street. That's it.
Okay, thanks, Yassamine. It's quite it's getting late now, comrades. We'll think about ending the meeting, but we should take Tina, then Pam, and then Jack. Okay, Tina.
Very, very briefly on your part, it's quite funny. The campaign now has been launched by Corbyn's slate, and I just had an email from the Peace and Party Project about getting the party back on track, and had a quick look at the the campaign video, and it's basically trying to say, the problems we're having, is very bad, but it's not been our fault, is it? It's all this inward looking, all these people fighting each other, etc. That's basically the left. So the campaigns now, they're basically trying to pose it as Corbyn tried to be the sensible one, we're just trying to build a party, and this navel gazing by people who bang on about, what are they banging on, Jeremy? Can you give us an example? Of course not, so it's not about, we're banging on about democracy and transparency, having the branches be able to allow to function, etc. So it's an entirely cheeky campaign that's trying to put the blame on the left that's been fighting for openness and transparency and democracy. So I'm hoping this will backfire, because I think most people who are active in any branches, proto branches, will know exactly what the problem is, and it's not the left. It is the fact that we've not been given data. We've not been given the chance to, people doing it anyway, but, no democracy in run-up conference, no motions, no amendments. The regional assembly is an absolute joke by anybody who was there, knows it was an absolute joke. So they're going to have a hell of a task at hand trying to convince people that that's the fault of the left. Having said that, online voting, blah, 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 the majority of your party members are probably not involved in branches. They're probably not actively trying to do anything. I mean, out of, I think it's 58,000 members or something, 22,000, I think, voted in this stupid Christmas referendum, just a bit more than voted at conference. So most people don't even know, either they don't vote or they're not 22,000 are verified members. So, and half of them voted. So most members don't even know they're not verified members. So it's all very smoke and mirrors, etc. Will they be allowed to vote? Perhaps in this leadership election. So it's all very, for members who don't know what's going on, this could look attractive. It's the fault of the left that your party's been doing so badly and it's not been growing. But I think anybody who knows anything a little bit even will know this is absolute rubbish. And they've started their campaign. Jeremy Corbyn was very open about it in Bradford. He wants to overturn collective leadership, and he wants to overturn the semi-allowed list of dual membership, which isn't real anyway. We're not allowed, no left group yet is allowed to be involved. You have to be allowed by the CEC. So at the moment, we're starting off with a ban on any left groups, which is why Chris Williamson could be disbarred. Nobody else yet, apparently, but I'm sure Dave Nellis will probably be disbarred, and perhaps Michael Lavalette as well for counterfire. It's not public yet, but we'll find out soon. So they're against collective leadership, against dual membership, not against factionalism. So the many is not a slate, it's a faction, it appears. They're not selling it as a slate, but as a group of people, concerned citizens getting together, etc. So that the launch is now. So I'm also going to leave soon because I want to have a look at what they're saying. Cheers.
Thanks, Tina. Pam, your turn. Last speaker. Still muted.
Okay.
Oh, there you are. You're okay now. Yeah.
In the chat, Jeffrey Vernon has written, because Jeffrey must have seen this Crispin Flintoff this morning, because he says, that he thought what the Corbyn person was saying was reasonable because she was against purity tests. In other words, you have to be anti-Zionist and you have to be pro-trans rights for party membership. He didn't say that's what I'm saying. he says, for party membership. And the Corbyn person was saying she was for letting people bring their whole selves into the party, and that he thought that was a good thing. So that's something we can think about. Okay.
Is that it? Yeah, okay. Right, summing up, Jack. Reply to discussion, as they call it.
Yeah, I'm not going to comment on what was in chat. I don't tend to read chat. I'm sorry. Occasionally I do, but I don't see why comrades. I mean, I'm not saying don't use chat, but I much prefer comrades to come on, show your face. If you want to hide your face, that's fine. Say your piece. Pam's version of someone else. I'm not gonna go there,
Okay.
Pam. I'm sorry.
All
Okay,
right.
so what? Now you need to silence yourself. I've got exclusive rights at the moment. No heckling. I approve of heckling except when I'm heckled. It's a joke. Okay, Paul, you asked about agents. I don't know. I think Yasmine's answered. You know, but I don't really buy your as you know, your take on Ukraine. I mean, I will be writing inevitably the article on Ukraine next month. I might write one before then, but I'm not planning to. But it will be on the fourth anniversary of big Russia and its special military operation. Hasn't that gone well? And my answer is no. It's been appalling. You know, Russia hasn't triumphed. I was reading, again, it's a piece of propaganda, but I was reading some article, you know, by some so-called think tank, making the point that if you compare the Red Army in World War II against Nazi Germany, having suffered an initial massive hit by the Nazis, got to Berlin, right, in under 4 years. Well, it hasn't even got to Kiev, has it? I mean, it's given up cities that it previously held. So I don't buy your version of, you know, the triumphant Russia and you know, NATO being weak and all the rest of it. But what I'm arguing, I don't think Ukraine is pivotal here. I think the United States is pivotal here. I think the United States is the global hegemon, and it's beside. Look, when J.D. Vance came to Munich, and he met the AfD. Get the message. What's going on? This isn't Putin promoting the far right. I know he had a bit of dibbly dabbly with Maloney and you know, France and all the rest of it. But this is Trump. This is J.D. Vance. This is the US administration promoting the far right in Britain and in Europe. So that's what's going on. You know, I don't see it as, well, Ukraine lose. I mean, when's Ukraine going to lose? It might well trade some territory. Anyway, so I'll leave that one aside for the moment. I just don't recognize it. In the same way, I'm with Ian from Durham. I'm just very skeptical on, oh, this bloke can't run his bloody company, and this reform local councillor is incompetent. I think bigger things are going on, Ian, and that's why I tried to put reform and generic and all the rest of it in the context of global capitalism, or at least the context of the global hegemon and what's going on there. And the fact that you've had generic defect, the fact that you've had, you know, former leading under Boris Johnson, leading, you know, ministers defect to reform. This is something about global politics. And I'm sorry, I don't think that someone not being able to run their company properly, or some incompetent new councillor is going to pull the wheels off Reform UK. I think this is wishful thinking. It's you want something to save you, and I don't think it will. So I think you're, to use a phrase, I think you're clutching at straws. What we need is an alternative, and it isn't your party. It's not Corbyn, it's not your party, it's a communist party, a real mass communist party. Then we can talk something sensible. Then we can talk about delivering real change, because then we'll have a strategy that is at least viable, right? i.e., the working class taking power on a continental basis as a prelude to global change. Anything else is inadequate. It doesn't mean that we dismiss demonstrations or strikes or anything. It's just saying that it's inadequate. So we need to get our act together. We need to dedicate ourselves to what we call it reforging the CPGB, but in reality, what we're talking about is a global communist party. That's our perspective. Okay. And ditto with Trump and what Pam you were saying. Look, read some history. I know you've read some history, Pam, so I'm teaching you to suck eggs. I'm really being patronizing here. So, but I mean, seriously, look at the regime of the Duke of Wellington, right? And you know, seriously, no habeas corpus. You know, they locked people, they banned working class organizations, they threw people in prison, they imposed strict limits on the press, you know, the working class press, sending in agent provocateurs, you know, into the workers' movement. Now, okay, you want to call that fascist, it's fascism, then fascism just becomes anything. Okay, you're just expressing your moral outrage. And I can see the point of moral outrage. I get morally outraged, but I just try to limit myself when it comes to politics of giving things their proper name. Right, so I'm not going to describe, for example, Elon Musk and how he runs X, or how he runs Tesla, or whatever the hell it is, as fascism. I'm sorry, yeah, if you want me to, okay, I'll get really annoyed. Steam comes out of my ears. That's called capitalism. That's its proper name. And when it comes to the Tesla AGM, didn't he actually propose that his pay packet, in inverted commas, was it 500 billion? Or was it a trillion? I can't fucking remember. Excuse my Anglo-Saxon. But, you know, so what I'm saying, Pam, is if we look at the past, you know, of bourgeois regimes, the norm for the bourgeoisie is to restrict the suffrage, right? What they want is to restrict the suffrage, right, either to themselves or to themselves and their retainers. Now, they're prepared to have factions sometimes, you know, where one takes over from the other. So the Prince's party takes over from the King's party, or something along those lines. But the bourgeoisie, and that's what I said in my remarks, is not a democratic class. So when we see policemen shoot people on the streets, what are policemen for, if not to shoot people and beat people? The police don't, you know, you and me maybe have been brought up too much under Dixon of Dock Green. And now then, you know, and that was written by a fucking, excuse me again, Anglo-Saxon communist, an official communist, right? The reality is that the reason why they gave British bobbies, so-called truncheons, is that they could be freer with their violence, right? As opposed to killing people, which caused outrage. But that's what they did. The militia, the so-called police, right? The working class movement opposed the bobbies, opposed the peelers, right? For good reason. They were sent in to break up armed meetings. So I don't see this, you know, the United States has suddenly become violent under Donald Trump. Anyone who knows a bit about American history will tell you how many were killed here, look, you know, how many students were killed at the Chicago conference, or, you know, whatever. let alone against black people. Isn't that the norm, that they shoot people? Anyway, maybe I've ranted long enough, but okay, if you want to use the word fascism, Alex Kalinikos, look, ICE is a government agency. It's a government. It's a government body. Not, Ian talks about people from the Proud Boys joining. Okay, sure. So what? So do you know that people in the BNP joined the police force? Does that make the police force in Britain fascist? It's just absurd. This is a state institution. So if you want to call everything fascist or whatever, then nothing becomes fascist. So, you know, yeah, morally it has a pleasing ring to it, doesn't it? You can spit and you can join with the Democrats who want to call it, you know, Donald Trump is a fascist. Okay. You know, but I don't think that the left ought to dovetail behind, or not dovetail. I don't think it should trail behind the Democrats. I think we've got our own agenda, and we don't want we don't want to be tailist to these. And that's why, again, I will call reform what I want to call it, and that ought to be a scientific definition. It's not fascist. Okay. If you call it fascist, you're meant to get more excited, aren't you? You know, we're meant to conjure up death camps or something like that. Anyway, so I just don't buy that. Again, I'll leave that one. Yeah, just well, okay, a throwaway, Stan. Excuse me, I can't resist this one. I don't know about on the Flintoff show and all that sort of stuff, but I was told by a comrade from Scotland that they're calling up in Scotland slates. They're English. Slates English. No, it's called politics. It's just politics, right? An argument is politics. You know, I'm sorry, the idea that if you have an argument, it's off-putting. It's only off-putting to control freaks. It's only off-putting to people who want only one word or only one line. They want to ban the other line, right? You know, if you want to look at a successful workers' party, it's called the RSDLP in Russia. You know, read the account of the first proper Congress, which begins with a split and is an argument from beginning to end. And the history of the Bolshevik Party. Oh, the terrible thing about the Bolshevik Party is it kept arguing with itself. No, the great thing, the great strength of the Bolshevik Party is it was constantly arguing within itself and resolving those arguments in whole or part, right? Bringing the party together. Okay, new question, new task, big disagreements, bring it together, not through unity mongering, but resolving the issues through argument and then through practice. And that is a strength, and that's what we ought to try to emulate. So we shouldn't be of the view that argument and splits and the left, you know, all that. No, what you end up with a bureaucracy, what you end up with is a bureaucracy which kills local initiative, which kills the development of individuals into theoreticians, into political leaders. It's precisely the atmosphere of argument, free debate that makes people into potential leaders. So no, Mike McNair didn't mention the work. I'm very glad that in your Marxist circles locally that they read the Weekly Worker so closely. That's great. Maybe they'll learn some lessons. Look, if they want, I mean, it's a rhetorical question. If they want to know our position, read our draft program. It mentions the working class. It deals with the question of parliament. If we are parliamentary roaders, then Karl Marx was a parliamentary roader. He thought, for example, that the Chartists could win a general election with one man, and we would now say, of course, one person, one vote. He thought that we would win. But then he said, right, what will happen is that the ruling class will organize what he called a slave owners rebellion. And he was thinking of the United States. And he was saying, well, we will then fight a civil war. So do the comrades think that we can't win a majority? And this was Richard, whatever his name is, Brenner's. We can't win a majority. If you can't win a majority, you've got no hope for socialism. So if your road to socialism is based on a minority, what you're dealing with is putschism. And how then can you introduce, or the working class, you're the ruling class. Oh, by the way, we know better because we're the revolutionary elite. We didn't win a majority. We just know better than you. Oh, by the way, you're the ruling class. This is anti-Marxist. If you want to use anything else, it's an educated dictatorship of the Bakunin sort. You know, you declare the state overthrown, and then, you know, because our revolutionary elite know the answers, we're really going to rule. This isn't Marxism. I don't know what it is, but anyway, they're wrong. And again, just on Soviets and all the rest of it, again, we have it in the draft program. Perhaps under certain circumstances, Soviets emerge. And I'm happy to announce that this year I'm publishing in honor of the 1926 general strike, a series of articles on the general strike, which of course included for the second round in 1926 the formation of councils of action, right? What Lenin called British Soviets. We will be celebrating the formation of councils of action. Now, that doesn't mean we ignore local elections or national elections. The Bolsheviks were able to walk and chew gum at the same time. They stood in Soviet elections. They also stood in local elections. They also stood, don't know why, and this is the Trotskyist workers' power lot, they stood in elections to the Constituent Assembly. And they stood in elections to war committees, production committees. Where there were elections, the Bolsheviks sought to stand, right, and put forward their propaganda, put forward their agitation. That should be our view. Give us an election, even an unfair election, we will stand in it. So were the Tsarist elections free and fair? You must be kidding. They were organized in Curia. There were 6 out of all the MPs, there were 6 from the working class. The priests had more MPs than that. Did that stop the Bolsheviks standing? You must be joking. Lenin welcomed the fact that you had a Curia system of what you could tell how the working class voted, and the Bolsheviks won the majority of the working class vote and said, look how strong we are. So no, we want to be doing all sorts of different things. And with that one, Stan, I have come to a welcome end. Sorry, we are way over time, nearly half past, so apologies for that. But
nothing
hey,
wrong with
hasn't
that.
it been fun?
Nothing wrong with that. And of course, Parliament is just one of many forms of struggle, and we use all forms of struggle, don't we? So next week we're going to do Alex Gordon, is it? He's become secretary of the CPB and Greenland and whatever. But remember, comrades, that in these meetings we don't try and cover all the news. We want to discuss what the items that are raised by the speaker. That's the preference anyway. Okay.